Welcome back to The Energy Fix, a podcast dedicated to help you balance your energetic body by diving deep into the sweet world of all things health and spirituality. My name's Tanzi, and I'm an intuitive crystal Reiki energy healer, energetic nutrition and holistic health practitioner, and a crystal jewelry designer. It's time to talk all things energy. Let's dive in. What if younger every year wasn't clickbait, but actually design? Today on the Energy Fix, we're getting wild and wise with Dr. Kavin Mistry, a board certified neuroradiologist who created Primal Health Design. He blends MRI-level science with ancestral wisdom that he's learned growing up in Africa. Think the Hadza tribe common sense mentality meets modern medicine. And it turns into this beautiful lifestyle that you can actually live. In this conversation, we're going to bust the myth that longevity just means having more years. You're going to hear what reversing biological age actually is and how it's different from simply just living longer. You're going to also hear about the 7 key paradigms inside Primal Health Designs and exactly how to start applying them today. We're going to talk about how you can design your day like a true craftsman by doing it on purpose so that your brain, your energy, your mood all say, yes, please give me more. I want more of this. And if you stay till the end, you're going to hear Dr. Kavin really dropping all of the practical pieces that he finds so important to create daily habits that actually move the needle the most when it comes to aging in real life. Plus, he's going to be gifting you his morning routine PDF, and if you drop down into the show notes, you can grab that link. And just a real quick pulse check for my local fam that's hanging out here and that comes out to the events. I've got mini energy and crystal healing sessions on Thursday, October 23rd at Reiki by Ricky's. And yes, I can do them virtually if travel's a no for you. Then I'll be at the Market of Magic at the Lebanon Expo Center on October 25th and the 26th from 10 to 6 p.m. And I will be at the Hershey Gem Jewelry and Rock Show at Historic Acres of Hershey from 10 to 4 p.m. Okay, let's get into this. If your body is craving clarity, your soul wants a plan, then this one is your sacral yes. Take a deep breath. Let's get younger by design. Here's Dr. Kavin Mistry. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Energy Fix podcast, Kavin. Thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure, Tanzi.
You know, when I was reached out to have you on the podcast, the first thing that came to me that was so exciting, I saw ancient wisdom, health, ancient wisdom and health. And I thought, oh, this is beautiful. This is exactly the kind of conversations I love to have because this work that we do to keep our physical vessel, our mind, our emotions balanced, it spans across time and it really is influenced by our generations and our ancestors. And so we're going to be diving all into that today. However, I want to know just where you're at right now. We're going to be talking about the past. Let's talk about the present and the future. Where are you at right now in regards to this season of your life? Is there a word or a phrase that you're really embodying, that you're connecting to right now?
Tanzi, that's a great question. If I could encapsulate it all into one word, it would be reconnecting. And I believe that from my perspective as a physician, as nice as modern life is, and with all the conveniences and social media and all the technology, what I do see is it is disconnecting us from who we are and who we were designed to be. And so part of my journey, and every day to me becomes a journey to reconnect. Um, and to reconnect with our primal self. So, and that's what we'll talk about.
Mm. And you're so spot on with that. I love technology and I love the conveniences that we have. But I also, I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s. And honestly, to know both worlds is so magnificent. And I'm just curious, how have you been really staying with that reconnecting when it's easy to get disconnected in the world that we currently live in now?
And it is challenging, I would say, and that's a very broad question, okay? And in my book, Primal Health Design, what I talk about is our seven different connections that we over time have lost and have to sort of reclaim those and integrate that into our life. On a personal level, if I were to say how I am reconnecting, and one of the things that has truly transformed the quality of my life, I can say, is that we tend to go by the cycles of what society expects from us. Let's say we have a dinner date at 8 p.m. Lunchtime is a set time. Breakfast is at 8 a.m. And when you really dive into how our body was designed, let's just take sort of meal times, for example. And I was having this conversation earlier with another practitioner that our body will primally is designed to rise and rest with the sun. And if we look at everything in our body in terms of hormone secretion that happens, in terms of digestive juices that are secreted for food, all the way from the detox that happens in our brain and our body and everything like that, it's on a very s- specific cycle that is in sync with that circadian rhythm. And so if you go back to ancient teachings and you go back to even primal living where people they didn't even have teachings, they just kind of intuitively knew. If you saw that people had very little food early part of the day, but they would have a very heavy meal at around noontime and then would have a very light meal sort of at the trail end of the day if they needed to. And that was very specific. And this is actually also, if you look at Eastern cultures right now, in India, in a lot of the Asian countries, they will have a very complete meal at noontime, but then rest of their meals are very, very light because our body just naturally is primed to have the highest level of digestion and everything right at around where the sun peaks at around noontime, and then less so on the trail ends. And it's so important because that, if we go by the way society functions, we would love to have that 8 p.m. dinner reservation and have that like Italian dinner. And I'm all for that. I love that and having that. But if that becomes a pattern, if that becomes the norm, in the long run, what you find is that your body is not designed for that, is not designed to have a full meal at 8 p.m. And so what happens is when you start behaving the way society expects you to, you don't digest the food well, which impacts how you sleep that night. And when the way you sleep that night impacts how you wake up at night, how your energy is the next morning, and then it just snowballs into this spiral where you're not optimizing your health. Just from those disconnects to where our body was designed from a primal point of view.
Mm. Well, okay, and so this is potential, well, I shouldn't say, but this is a loaded question. How do you think that we got so turned around in our Western culture?
I think it's a lot of um, many different factors, right? In modern society, I mean, if let's say we were using the sun as our source of light, then then by sunset you should be done with all your work, and really you should be done by dinner by then because there is no light anymore to do anything, right? But now we have electricity, we have the ability to work late into the night, stay up late into the night, and but when you realize that these modern conveniences, as much as we are feel like, oh, this has been forever, electricity has been forever, it's in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the 200,000 year human history, um, electricity and having light at night is just a sliver. It's such a small portion of that, right? That so you're competing against genetics that are programmed for those 200,000 years. You introduce all these conveniences, and all of a sudden now you say, oh, okay, well, this is the norm, right? But your body is like, no, that's not the norm. So it is convenient. I guess it's nice to have the lights on and in the evening, and to be able to do work and whatnot. But I think that if we're mindful and we pay respect to the way our body is designed, and I tell people, for example, around 9, 10 o'clock, there's a natural inclination within everyone's body, no matter how much you ignore it, because there's a natural rise in melatonin and natural fall in cortisol around 9, 10 p.m. That if you don't respect that, your body you will power through it. But every day you do that, you're losing that natural kind of rhythm to fall asleep. And I did this once. I did this webinar on sleep, and I kind of went through this whole process of telling people about sleep and sleep cycles. And I was mentioning this, and I told everybody, and I had this, I don't know, we had like 300, 400 people on there. And what I said was, I said, just within the next 2 weeks, just give me one day where you can be in bed at 9:30 p.m. I said, just make an appointment with yourself and just say at 9:30 I have an appointment to go to sleep, and just put that on your calendar, and just be in bed by 9:30. And if you do that, you'll naturally fall asleep by before 10. And I just want you to do that and just tell me how you feel the next day. And so I put that out there, and it was funny because this was like weeks later. Then I get all this follow-up from all these people. He goes, you said to try that 9:30 thing, and I did, and this woman goes, it was such a big difference. I woke up the next day, I feel like a whole new person. She's like, I never experienced true sleep, until I did that. And what a simple thing. It's not like anything miraculous, right? It's just sort of listening to what the primal design is within us.
Yeah. And I'll even add to that. I'm over here kind of chuckling to myself because I know like eight I try to do this pretty consistently that at 8:30 in the evening I start my ritual. And my ritual is, I grab my book, some tea, my cat, and I lay down and I just start to let my body really unwind. And I know there is a huge difference on those nights where I have to work later or I have a late appointment and I don't actually get to sit down on the couch until like 9:30, 9:45. It is like it's like pulling teeth to try to get my body to just relax and be in that peaceful place. I feel like you said, I feel like I've missed my window.
Yeah.
Huge difference. Now, I may not be asleep by 9:30, but I at least I can see that difference of how much more peaceful, how much more my nervous system gets to calm when I give myself the opportunity to allow it to rest in the time frame that it is designed to rest.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I tell people that, every day is going to be a little different, and like you said, you have those evenings where, you're
Yeah.
sometimes I have to attend events and, we're there till like 10 p.m., But, you have to apply sort of like the 80/20 rule. And so I think generally people have control over 80% of the time, and say that, so I don't want to design a pattern where I'm consistently going to bed at midnight for sure. That would be wrong, right? So if I have that control, I'm going to try to push it where I'm trying to hit that time frame, right? Like be in bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock. And I knowing that there will be some nights that'll be out of control, right? So, but I think that if our baseline is aligned with our primal design, then I think we can really optimize health.
Yeah. Well, Kavin, you're a neuroradiologist who's learned timeless health from the Hadza, and you grew up around fine woodworking. It's quite the trio. And so I would love to hear a little bit about what moment made you realize that those threads really belong together as primal health design. What brought all that together to make this unique piece that you are now all encompassed in?
S- Tansy, that's a great question. And you know, sometimes you you need certain experiences to tie in all the dots in our life, And uh, when when I started medicine and I went into radiology, one of the first things is that I saw that the on my screen when I started seeing people's spines and bodies and all this degeneration. I should see 30 and 40-year-olds with degenerated spines and I said, wow, that's isn't that odd that these people have all this level of degeneration? So I would ask my seniors residents and I would say, why does this patient have so much degenerative disease? And they would be like, just read the damn film, like you just do your job and don't question. We don't ask those questions. But that stayed within me. I said, isn't that why aren't we asking these questions, right? So I kind of it kind of planted a seed. I said, if given an opportunity, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to raise this question. Why are we aging faster? Why is our body aging faster than our chronological age, right? And and I kept that and I kept that and I started researching about longevity. And then I would say so, and the reverse would happen, Tansy. One of the things would happen was I'd pull up a brain and I would look at, and a lot of time one of the things I do is I like to guess the patient's age by just looking at their body, right? Or their body or their brain. And I'd sometimes pull up a brain, I'll say, okay, that person is 40. And I look at the age and the person would be like 80. And I go, wow. I said, this guy is doing something right? And so I would look in the charts and I'd say, what are they doing to have a brain that's biologically, looks like a 40-year-old brain? And these patterns begin to form, right? And then I used to see that, okay, oh, so this is what they're doing, and maybe or this is not what they're doing. Maybe they're not drinking, maybe they gave up alcohol, maybe all these things. And so I started making these buckets, and eventually all those buckets, transformed into seven piles, and those became the seven paradigms that I talk about in the book. One of the interesting thing was along the way, I started researching and I said, so I said, let's look at cultures where people don't have high level of chronic diseases, right? So because all these people that I was looking at on my screen had like every time I look at their medical history would have diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, they're on cholesterol medications and everything like that. And so I said, well, does everybody have chronic diseases? Are we just destined to have chronic diseases? Is there something we can do about it? Again, this is as a young doctor, I'm asking these questions. And then I started reading. I said, oh, well, why are people getting chronic diseases? Or are there cultures that are not getting chronic diseases? So that led me down this path where they said that, there's certain tribes in Tanzania and other places and that have very low incidence of chronic disease. I said, interesting. I said, tribes in Tanzania, and I lived in Tanzania. So my childhood from age 5 to 10, my dad was with the United Nations. Part of his work took us to Africa, and so we lived there, and I grew up there. So part of my dad childhood was in Tanzania, and he was with his project. He used to go and into these spaces where there was these tribes, and um, since I was at that critical age where you pick up languages really quickly, I picked up the local language, which is Swahili, really well. So I was fluent in Swahili. And so much so that my parents used to use me as an interpreter with the locals there. What is interesting is the tribes, these Hadza tribes, they have their own dialect, which is called Hadzane. It's a click type language, and you may have some people, may have seen videos of these click languages that these Africans use. But interestingly, they can converse and understand Swahili. So I became a medium because I knew Swahili really well. They could understand Swahili. My parents could understand my language, so I could talk to everybody. I could talk to the tribes guys. I could talk to the locals. I could talk to my parents. So it was beautiful. So I was like this. I was a medium where I could converse with everybody and learn from everybody. And so with the kids there, with the tribal kids, I would say, "Oh, I call this in my language. What do you call it in this?" And then they would just teach me all these words in their language. Beautiful. And so the interesting thing was, as I was digging into this research, and they said these certain tribes have very low incidence of chronic disease. And I dug deeper and I said, on this, and they mentioned the name, the Hadza tribe. And I said, the Hadza tribe. And I said, what area is that? And I'm looking, and it's like Tanzania. I said, okay, I know I was in Tanzania. Then I'm like, where in Tanzania? So then I'm looking on the map, where these guys are, and it was the tribes that I hung out with. I never knew that these were the Hadza tribe. To me, they were just tribes, like these guys that I hung out with. So, so it was such a revelation. I said, wow, the longevity research that is talking about the tribes, they're talking about the Hadza tribe that I was with. I said, these are my people, or people I hung out with. And I said, if anybody, I should be giving some input on this because I was there living it. And then I started making connections. I said, oh, okay, so what did we eat? What were they eating? How were they behaving? And so that's where all these connections grew because then I said, oh, that makes sense. That's why maybe they have low chronic diseases. And so then from all the longevity research and the science, I could tie it back into my own experiences as a child, you know. And so it's been this journey. And part of the journey was I come from a lineage of woodworkers. So everybody in my family, they're all in design and architecture, woodworking. Everybody is in a design field. My wife, that's her painting behind me. She's an artist. Her whole families are architects. Anyway, so is my family. So one of the things growing up in this kind of culture of design, right? And I didn't go in a design field, but that aspect of designing something meaningful and lasting was always within me. And so the question became that I have all this information. I'd grew up with the Hadza. I'd learned their kind of rituals. I knew kind of how they lived and what they ate and how they slept. And then I knew that all these chronic diseases that we had in our culture, and I said, could we design rituals and practices to make that connect, right? Could we bring those practices, those primal practices to our modern life? And hence the book Primal Health Design.
Oh, I love that. What an awesome story. I love how you took your family history and brought that into this wealth of knowledge that you were so passionately diving into. That's so cool. Well, 'Cause let's stick on this biological age, the reversing of the biological age. I feel like that gets thrown around so much, so much. But I also feel like a lot of people have a certain definition, or it might have a stigma about what it is in regards to how people interpret that. So, in your language, what does reversing biological age actually mean? And how is it different from just living longer?
Sure, sure. And so if we define the terms, so when we talk about longevity, we talk about longevity is expanding or when we talk about lifespan, okay, it's basically extending the time of our years on Earth, right? It's basically our what we talk about in terms of our chronological age, right? And expanding that. That's one aspect. And I think for the longest time, everybody was focused on living longer. But I think the focus now is not that we're taking focus away from living longer, and that piece is important, but we want to live longer, healthier, which means we want the lifespan with the health span, which means that we want health along with that lifespan, right? And so how do we make this happen, or how does this come into play? So give you an example. For example, the we know that our heart at a certain age, the understanding we've had for many, many years is you born with a certain level of cardiovascular health, right? And then when you get into your 50s and 60s, your heart, is not as efficient as before. People start walking slower, they start avoiding steps, they because mentally you know that your heart is just designed to get weaker, right? And that's been the old paradigm, right? However, it's interesting, and one of these just lots of different studies, but one of the studies, they took 40, 50-year-olds and started um, training giving them a training in terms of a what is known as a Norwegian protocol. It's a 4x4 Norwegian protocol. Norwegian because that the study that was done came from that area of the world, right? It was a European study, and they called it the quote unquote Norwegian protocol. But it's nothing specific to them, but basically it's training your heart 3 to 4 minutes at a very sort of high like hit training, where you're in that zone 5, that high heart rate training for 3 to 4 minutes, and then there is a rest period, and then you kind of do that for 4 cycles, just to kind of encapsulate that concept for you, for the listeners here. And interestingly, that when and just doing this 2 times a week for 2 years. I mean, it's not a short period of time, but just doing 2 times a week for 2 years, they were able to bring the heart in terms of biological age. They were able to reverse the biological age of these participants by 10 to 15 years. So you would have a 40-year-old who would have a heart that is behaving like a 25-year-old, because the heart, when they put this right type of stress and right type of rest, the heart itself is so malleable, it's so pliable, it started changing and it started accommodating that workload. And because you removed that paradigm that, oh no, my heart is supposed to get weaker, they actually reversed the heart age, and not by few years, by 10 to 15, in some cases to 20 years, which to me is phenomenal when you think of it and you think of that model, and if that's possible, okay? Um, so if we get that message out there that this is possible, that your body is so malleable, is so pliable, This not only applies to heart, we apply it to our brain also. And the same thing is possible in terms of neuroplasticity and what we're able to do with our brain. So, in short, there is a lot of room in terms of actually reversing our biological age when we look at these separate parameters.
And would you say that those seven key paradigms that you highlight in your book are a large part of what allows this shifting to happen, this reversing of that biological age?
Yes, and there's a deeper layer to this, Tansy, and it's see, one part is when we focus on the physical aspect of life, and it's wonderful that we can reverse our cardiovascular age. We can make our brain younger by doing certain things in terms of neuroplasticity. And I talk about all of that in the book. Okay. But what's interesting, Tansy, is that when we started looking at w- other areas of our life that pertains to our biological age, and when you look at the studies from the blue zones, if you when you talk about the longevity and blue zones, everybody's familiar with that series and the research that came out of that. What they said was these the yes, all these things are possible in terms of reversing our biological age from the physical aspect, but then there was the idea of our emotional health, mental health we talked about, but there's also this idea of emotional health and existential health that come into play. And what I mean by that is what we found is that when these cultures in Eastern cultures started having these support systems, right? In Japan, and they have this concept of moai. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. Moai is a group of lifelong friends. So you create this group, and and I saw that growing up in Tanzania with the Hadza, because they naturally had their own tribe, right? They were all interdependent on one another. A moai is I would say it's more than a group of friends, but it's a group that basically you grow old with and you support each other until your last day. And what they've found is that just having that framework, that having that tribe that supports you through thick and thin, no matter what situations you're going through. Everybody has rough periods in their life, but having that, it the level of mental disorders in these groups is extremely low. They don't have anxiety, they don't have depression, they don't have all these other things that we suffer from in many modernized countries. And versus, people are not very low suicide rate, really zero suicide rate just because of that support structure. And so beyond what we just talked about reversing the biological age, part of it, what plays into this is that there is a emotional health component of it, which is just as important because we know that when people have chronic stress, either, and you look at United States, you look at European countries, and you look at one of the biggest issue right now with social media and everything like that is loneliness. And it's an epidemic because people are lonely. They're infinitely connected, but yet lonely, right? Which is it's such a paradox that online you're connected to everybody, but within your own space you're lonely because you really don't have a true connection, right? And so there's a lot to learn from these cultures because they are able to make that part of their life so vibrant and that have that such a high level of emotional health that they don't fall into these traps. And so I think those pieces are just as important as reversing, cardiovascular age and kind of neuronal age and all that.
Yeah. Uh, Moai, that makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. The lifelong friends. As you were talking, I was writing some things down because so much was clicking. Your original word was reconnection. And it's all about connection. We as humans need to have connections. We need to interact with people as part of being healthy human beings. And I find it there, the irony did not get lost on me that here in our Western culture, especially, I will only speak for our Western culture because I live here, but here in our Western culture, it's always pushed and almost held on a pedestal when you are that strong individual that doesn't need anybody else in your life, that you can do it all by yourself. And don't let anybody tell you that you can. You don't need to have friends. You don't need to have a support system because you can do it by yourself. Right? I mean, could be like this is just so fascinating because it's something that I feel that we've gotten really far away from when in reality it is part of our life force.
It is, and Tansy, I mean, you raise a great point. We sort of put those people on pedestals. Like people say, you need to be the lone wolf, you need to do the grind, and you need to be the. However, it was interesting when I was in college. I would say I read this one book and it really stuck with me, this concept. It was this book by Stephen Covey. It's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and parts of the book are the whole book is great, and but there was this just one segment in the book, and it just it has stayed with me forever. And he goes, we're all born dependent, right? You were dependent on your parents, then we're dependent on our teachers to tell us what to do, and then you get married, and maybe you're dependent on your spouse to tell you what to do, right? All the husbands probably can relate to what I'm saying, right? Uh, and so, but and then you mature into being independent, right? Where you think like, oh, I can make my own decisions. I get to make my own brand. I'm going to have my own social status and do that. And but he said something and he goes, is that's good. But he goes, when you truly mature, you realize that real power is in interdependence. When you realize that really it's in the tribe and the community that you create, that is your true power because and I think people are realizing that now, you know, once they go through the fact that they are lonely and then they realize that they cannot do it alone. I think people are coming full circle and realizing, you know what? I do need a community. I do need to collaborate because, anything great you're going to do, if you're going to do something phenomenal, it's going to require a team of people, right? It just cannot be done by one person, And even simple as like with publishing my book, just to do that, the amount of collaboration it requires from the publishing team to the editors to, in terms of, website development and everything like that. It just requires so much collaboration to do anything like that. So so I think that is true maturity when you learn to embrace the word interdependence.
Yeah, I agree. You know, that was why I started this podcast. Not because I was lonely and I needed to have friends. That's not what I'm talking about. But I started this podcast because I knew that in the depth of my soul, in the depth of my heart, I wanted more of a message to be brought out into this world because people are thirsty for it. And also, people want alternatives. People want other options. They want something that's different than the narrative that they've been told over and over and over again, right? And so creating this community of practitioners and then, of course, listeners to move forward together and to expand and join hands. That's why this was created. It was created out of that desire to be able to join forces together. And I'll tell you, since doing this, this podcast has been, and I say this all the time, but this podcast has been one of my greatest joys because I've seen people's lives literally changing because of certain guests that I've had on here. Information that I wasn't able to share because it's not my area of expertise, right? And so I love this because you're right. We can't do anything great without the forces of people like us or people like you, listener, right? People like you coming together with other forces to move forward. And that could be either in your work, but it could also just be in your personal life, in your relationships that you're close to. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you make such a good point, Tansy. And I would add one more layer to that, okay? That one part is maturing from dependent to independent to interdependent, right? Going through that spectrum. And I thought it would end there, and it was interesting. And I said that, oh, okay, once I kind of build a team, and I have a great team. I can tell you, like around me, on many different levels, and meeting people, wonderful people like you. Um, but I lost my parents about 3 years ago, and I lost both of them in a short amount of time, in a span of 2 years. And the last paradigm seven, could not have come out. I could not have written that without that happening in my life, and really once that happened, it was the only time I could really conceive the whole book because it made sense. Like a lot of things made sense, and it's sad that it required that event for that to happen. And I guess my only regret with everything is that my parents could never see me put out a book, because I think they would have enjoyed it and had the pride of, seeing that come to fruition, because I always talked about it. But anyway, and so and I thought that interdependence was the ultimate maturity, but it was interesting. So I went to visit my dad during his sort of like he developed this form of incurable lymphoma and whatnot, and he kind of knew where things were going and everything like that, and so I'm visiting him in the hospital, and he goes and he goes, Kavin, he goes, let me show you something, and he showed me this picture of the sailor. Okay. And he goes, do you know who that is? And I said, I don't know who that is. And he goes, let me tell you a story. And then he tells me the story and my dad wasn't he wasn't like, he was an engineer. He had a modest life. He wasn't like, super wealthy or anything like that. But he showed me this picture of a sailor. He goes, you know who that is? And I said, I don't know who that is. And he starts to tell me that he had this distant cousin in India who was disabled, and was after her parents died, the rest of the family had thrown her through the streets, and she was almost more or less homeless. And she'd reached out to my dad many, many years ago and said, like, listen, I'm just gonna I'm homeless. I'm gonna just die out here. Is there anything you can do to help me? And my dad just, I don't know what inside him, something stirred and whatnot. He just gave her his word. He goes, until I live, he goes, you'll never need to beg. And he goes, you just tell me, what you need for your kind of survival, and I'll make it happen. And so he supported her across countries for all these years, not letting us know. He didn't, he said, I didn't never told you guys because you guys may not let me do it, and may see that I'm taking something away from my family to do this and all that. So he goes, I just kind of made it happen. I saved up money and would send it occasionally. Anyway, so he supported this woman across the country, She was got her trained, she got a job, she found a person at work, got her married, had a son, sent him to school, provided education for him to school, and finally he became my sailor in the Navy, and that was the picture he was showing me. And then he said, and he goes, I'm not afraid of dying, He goes, what I'm afraid of is that I won't be able to do this type of work anymore. And this family, he's like is taken care of because he's going to be a successful sailor and now that he's able to support the family. But he kind of pulled me over and he goes, Kavin, your greatest gift is your ability to give. Because the fact that you can give means that you have something more than somebody else in front of you. And he goes, so your greatest gift is the ability to give. And as long as you give, that's your greatest gift. And you do not expect anything back in return. You give and you walk away because that's what you were designed to do. And honestly, Tansy, I just sat on the floor and I said, man, all these years I've been keeping score. Every time I do something, I'd be like, oh, well, what did you do for me? Like what's in it for me? And what's my rate of return? What do I get out of it? And it was always like, you always have these calculations in the back of your head. And I said to myself, I said, Kavin, did you ever truly give? Where you just gave and you said, I just doing it for the sake of it. And that's when I said, you know what? And we're going to make this book happen. And I'm going to do it not because really it's like the for that kind of that prestige as an author or or anything like that, but I said that I'm just going to give it because I just want this information out there because if people can heal from this, if people can better themselves from this, let it be. You know what I'm saying? And then I will just make it happen. And that's my message. And I found that that's the ultimate level of maturity is that yes, interdependence, but a level above that is when you realize at the end of the day, at the end of your life, how many people are better off because you lived. And when you realize that statement, you will say, you know, and if your greatest gift is that you can give, then you just spend your time giving and not looking back. And I think that's what I've kind of committed to, kind of going forward. And it's really changed how I live.
Mm,
Totally.
mm. Well, first off, I'm really sorry for the loss of your parents and that they couldn't be here to see that finished book. But I gotta say, isn't it amazing? Isn't it beautiful that literally the finality of your book was a gift that they gave to you?
Yes.
A gift of knowledge that they gave for you to really just kind of lock in the end of that chapter and expand out, say, oh, it all ties together. Here it is. How beautiful.
Yeah. No,
Wow.
thank you.
Wow. Well, your framework, as you've mentioned a few times, your framework rests on seven key paradigms. And before we unpack them a little bit, I would love to know which one really tends to change people the fastest and which one quietly changes them the deepest. Like if you could pick one or two that
Yeah.
really stand out, in your opinion, personally, what would you say that those are?
So I would say which one is most tangible for people? And paradigms one, two, and three, which is connection with earth, body, food, is more geared towards changing our physical body. And we talked a little bit about that, reversing cardiovascular age and everything like that. And I think that's good. And that's what essentially popular culture is designed for, right? All the yoga classes and like, getting fit and kind of doing cardio and everything like that. It's kind of all geared towards making our physical body or physical optimizing our physical health. And I think it's wonderful. I think all of that is great. But I think that the first paradigm that I feel that people will feel that something radically has changed in me is paradigm four, Okay. And paradigm four I talk about is the mental health or making that mind-body connection. And here's what I mean by that. There's a section in that chapter, it's titled Stillness versus Illness. And what I talk about is that if you look at any thought that you have right now, and just look at if you take an inventory of whatever you've been thinking, maybe in this past few minutes while you're talking to me, right? Um, if you just kind of categorize those thoughts, right? They will fall into one of two buckets. One will be maybe some regret of the past. You're like, oh man, I should have done that. I forgot to do this, or like that. Or some anxiety of the future, right? Oh, I have to make sure I do this. I'm going to make sure I send them this. I don't want to make sure you understand what I'm saying? It is always some anxiety or something in the future that you're projecting, or something you're recalling that you regret, or like you're kind of remembering. And so we always ping pong between regrets of the past and anxieties of the future. And what I tell people is like, you wake up in the morning and here's this beautiful sunrise, right? And you open your phone and you look at this text message telling you, okay, today we got this meeting at 2 p.m. Or, oh, I can't believe she said that to me. You'll see all your texts, all your emails are going to pull you to your regrets of the past or anxieties of the future, and you miss the sunrise that's right in front of you, and you miss the now, you know? And so between this past and the future, there's this little sliver of now, and that's the present, right? And we forget to be in this space. And when what I feel that in this day and age, when I talk to people, I can tell within like 10 seconds if they're with me or not, and I'm sure you can too, right? Because you just need to look into people's eyes and you can tell if they're with you and they're present right now here with you. And we're losing that capacity. Okay. And when you talk about one of the reconnections as we started this podcast with, and I use the term reconnecting, it's reconnecting with that quality of being present in the now, right? If you look at if you were back in the African savannah and you had to hunt your food, right? You would be tracking that prey, and you would be so zoned in to every little leaf moving, every little movement of that animal to try to track and hunt that animal down. You would be so much in the present that we couldn't move you out of the present because you only know to be in the present, right? You wouldn't be thinking about the yesterday or the tomorrow or everything like that. And so I dedicate this whole chapter of dropping people into the present, of reconnecting with that quality of being here and now. And I think when people experience that, when the first time people really can drop into being in the present moment, it's so transforming for people. And they were like, wow, that feels unbelievable because they're so trained to be here and here that it's such a change for people to be in that space. And I feel like
Mm.
that's very transformative.
Yeah. Oh, and so you may address this in the book, but I'll just ask you this now. How do people start to practice being more present when we're living in a world that maybe is so chaotic and can really pull your attention away like that?
That's a wonderful question, Tanzi, and many different ways of approaching this. But one of the most simplest ways that I tell people, okay, in the book, I talk about this practice, and it's a practice that is written in many Buddhist texts and whatnot. It's a very, very simple practice. Nowadays, we call it conscious breathing, but in the term that they're used in the texts, these ancient texts, is this term called Anapanasati yoga. Okay. Anapana means in breath, out breath. Sati means observing, right? Just being an observer. And yoga means union. So what they were trying to say in that phrase is that because the breath is one of the things that can only be in the now. You cannot breathe in the yesterday, you cannot breathe in the tomorrow. It's now, right? Like when I'm watching my breath, I have to make my focus in the present moment, right? So when I can watch the in breath and the out breath, it automatically puts my focus in the now. And so when we brought watch that in breath, out breath, and just be an observer of it without controlling it, it drops us in the now. And it's a practice which deepens on its own. And I tell people to start with few minutes of it. And I lay out a little bit of a game plan in the book that people can follow. But you can see that once you can get to 10 minutes and 15 minutes, if you can get to 20 minutes, and this is where science and neuroscience comes in. What we found in neuroscience, and people must have heard the term flow. You've heard the term flow, right? And people say, how do you get into flow, right? And flow is when you do something where you don't have to consciously do it. Now you're just doing it. It's when the tennis player goes into this mode where he's not thinking, but he's just reacting and he's able to return the serves. It's when the ballet dancer goes into that mode where they're no longer thinking, their body is just moving. And very few people have experienced flow. And one of the ways you can actually experience a flow is when you build up this practice of Anapanasati yoga and this conscious breath watching from 5, 10, 15 minutes. And if you can hit 20 minutes, what I've found for myself, and all the research in neuroscience says that when you hit that 20-minute mark, your brain all of a sudden it figures out that now it's in this groove. It's on these railroad tracks, and it's just going to run on these railroad tracks. And now you don't have to force yourself to be in that present. All of a sudden, you drop into that present. You feel that flow, and it's very transformative to people for people. And I've experienced it myself, and people who've I've done guided meditations where people have felt a bit of it, and they're like, "Wow, that just felt different." And so that's one of the techniques that works really well for people.
Mm. I feel like breath work and the concept of breath work and the power behind breath work has been such a reoccurring, huge conversation in so many of my interviews lately. I mean, I don't know if people are just talking about it more or if it's meant that more people need to listen and it needs to be repeated over and over and over. But I couldn't agree more. The breath is that one place that you can't not be present when you pay attention to it.
Absolutely. It's the first thing you did and the last thing you'll do. So it's your silent partner, right? And so I think if you have that level of reverence for your breath, it can transform you. It's such a simple thing, right? I don't like to use the term meditation because meditation is so open to interpretation. And when I say meditation, people don't know how, in Eastern culture, first of all, there's no such term as meditation because it means eight different things in Eastern culture. There are eight different levels of meditation. But when we say meditation here, most people don't know. Does that mean watching your breath? Does that mean sitting quiet, watching your thoughts? So I like to be more directional for people and say, just sit there, just observe your breath. Let's do that. Let's start there. Let's start with a few minutes. Let's see what happens. And tomorrow maybe let's do five, right? And when you build that wiring to observe, right, things start changing.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about presence, but I also want to talk about design-led living. I mean, you talk about shifting from reactive medicine to design-led living. And I would love first of all, for you to talk about what that is, but also if we were to design a day that makes us younger, what are the non-negotiable inputs that you would like to place anchors in? Like they need to be part of this in order for you to really be able to reverse either the biological age or just your perception of how old you are.
Absolutely. That's that's a wonderful segue, I guess, in terms of uh, describing. You're asking how to ar be an architect of your day that's designed to reverse your biological age, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, in terms of non-negotiables, and there are many, in the book, I give many different practices, and after each paradigm, I give a lot of takeaways that people can do. And in fact, one of the things that happened was after the book, I was asked to design a course, which we just finished, which is more of like a one-on-one session where I kind of guide people through a 21-day transformation. And it's kind of like almost like one-on-one coaching with me. And, it's like having a conversation with me and diving deeper into all of this. But let's stick to the non-negotiables, right? One couple of things we already touched upon, and that when you wake up, your body needs to know that it is awake and that it is daytime, right? And that getting sun exposure within first 30 minutes of your day, at least for 10 to 15 minutes, it should be a non-negotiable because that sets your circadian rhythm and sets your whole sort of domino effect for the rest of the day in terms of hormone cycle, digestion, everything else is that's going to happen in the rest of your day. It's all going to domino from that initial stimulus of that sunlight input, right? So getting sun in the morning. If possible, I would say in my case, I'm in an area where I can step out and step onto ground. Okay, at least having some contact with the ground, if it's possible. And one of the things we're starting to understand is that there is just unbelievable amount of communication that happens between your body and the ground, and we're just trying understanding and wrapping our heads around all the communication that happens between our microbes and the microbes in the soil and kind of like the electrochemical communication that's happening and everything like that. And without getting too much deep into that, if if that's possible for people, that is great. And you could combine that with, sunlight exposure, maybe step out into the grass and get some sun and do that. Okay. The third thing I would say is that we want to engage one of the aspects of having that vitality within our system, okay, is is becomes comes from our primal alignment of our body, okay? And what modern society has done is that, if you look at the way we sit in front of a computer, let's say, I'm in front of a laptop now, automatically my shoulders are going to roll in because I have to be like this, right? So this counterbalance of bringing my shoulders back and down, right? That's one thing. And one of the best things I tell people the way you can do that is if people can incorporate a 30-second hang in the morning. What they'll do, a 30-second hang, which is nothing, right? 30 seconds is nothing really. What it will do is it will activate your whole posterior chain, okay? And what it does, once you activate that slowly, what you'll do is those muscles, as they activate, will naturally, when you're not thinking, and your tendencies to roll your shoulders forward, when you're not thinking, when those muscles are activated, they will actually pull your shoulders back and keep that more of a primal posture. Okay. And it's so healthy for kind of just the transmission of nerve signaling and everything like that to have that posture and not have back pain, in the long run, right? So that's what I find, that just that 30-second hang, it just changes people. And for lower back pain, if you're in shape and you're able to drop down to a complete squat, okay? And I'm talking a resting squat where you squat down and you can just have a conversation there, okay? If we were face to face somewhere, I would demonstrate it for you, but and when I do my talks, I will just sit there. I can sit in a squat and do a whole speech if I had to. I have no issues with that because it's so I just grew up with that, in Tanzania with the tribes, and it was such a resting posture for people. They would just sit around, talk to each other in a squat position. And it was such a primal. You look at little babies, they sit there in a squat and they'll like just like play with stuff, right? But how come we can't do it anymore? But when you squat at that level, your sacrum is pulled down and it naturally lengthens your lumbar spine. And when your lumbar spine is lengthened, all those issues with back pain, SI joint alignment, and like pelvic tilt and everything that people talk about as a source of low back pain, all of that starts dissolving over time when you can just do that something in the morning. So to me, those are my non-negotiable routines where I'll do a 30-second hang, I will do a day squat in the morning, okay? And I do have a breath watching practice, which I do. And over the years, I've trained myself to get to that. I do a 21-minute practice because I want to hit that 20-minute mark and have 1 minute more just to make sure. And I said I want to experience. But what happens is when I hit that, it puts me in that state, right? Now when I start my day, Tansy, I can tell you I start my day non-reactive and I start my day proactive. So when guy cuts me off on the road, I I I have that space, I have that gap that I can decide, am I going to get angry or I'm going to let that go and just keep my joy, you know? And before I used to it used to irk me. I used to my the road rage, Kavin, you used to come out and be like, what, I like, you cut me off. I'm going, so but now there's this space where I'm just like, Kavin, it's not worth it. Are you going to lose your joy because somebody cut you off? I'm like, no. Okay, let's focus on the bigger things. And it gives me that space, and it comes from that, I think, that morning breath practice. Okay. So from a physical point of view, I would say those are a few tips I think people can incorporate every day. Those are non-negotiables, and for me, and I think it can be a non-negotiable. It's easy non-negotiables for everybody. Okay. The other paradigms, I think, are areas that are more personal in terms of that is going to be more unique for people, right? And I think those will create 10x results for everybody, but it's going to be some more deeper work that people will need to do to get to those levels. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So a few questions on your non-negotiables. So first off, do you know what I mean by a yogi squat in yoga? The pose is called yogi squat. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Okay. So I'm bringing that up because I'm curious. Is that what you mean by the squatting? Like that yogi squat pose that's in yoga?
Yeah, so I mean the yogi squat you're talking about, like that squat where you're, but all the way down, but the no matter how your hand position is or whatnot, the main thing is it's a restful squat position. It's kind of like the what they call in in those weightlifting is like the AGT or ass to grass squat, like where you're all the way down, But it should be when you're in that position, it should be a restful posture. When you're there, you should be like, I can have a conversation in this position. And when you can do that, when you get comfortable enough to be in that, it's so many benefits because long term, all these issues that people have, right? Neck pain, mid back pain, low back pain, sitting at a desk, all these issues that come from that, you can be prevented by just these simple fixes that people can start their day off with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to give a visual for the listener so they
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
understood. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And then as I gotta say that hang, I have a pull-up bar in my doorway, and
Yeah.
I will do a hang like that and just let my body. Now, I don't think I do 30 seconds, which I will now increase, but I do that hang, and I'll tell you, when I do that regularly, I feel so much more. I feel energetically more balanced. I feel in alignment. Like there is something about that hang, and you've just explained it. There's something about that hang that makes me feel more whole and open. So I love that. And I was just always like, yeah, I do that one. I do that one.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm curious for those who aren't able to get outside or who can't get their feet into the ground, are there alternatives for them being either inside by a window or any alternatives?
Absolutely. Tansy, and then this is a question I've gotten from few of my readers, and I actually incorporate that into the book. I remember this woman from Boston that reached out to me and says, "I there is no way I could step out and put my feet on the ground near where I live for sure." It says, what's my alternative?" And so the best is right being in touch with Earth, and that's the best. But on the flip side, if you can get sort of barefoot uh, walking shoes. Some of them even have like grounding aspects to it, where they have that mechanism, and there are grounding shoes where it just gives you that kind of electrochemical aspect to it. There is benefit to that, okay, and that can be applied, and then that would work on just walking on, sidewalks and whatnot, where you don't have to touch your feet directly, and that does have some benefit. It will not give you the microbial benefit that we talked about, right? Because that is coming from the soil, but it will give the other benefit. However, I will say this is that there is one aspect, one of the that chapter on grounding and connecting with the earth, where I talk about this concept of Shinrin Yoku. Okay, it's a term from Japan. It means forest bathing. And what is interesting is that apart from us touching the ground, one of the things is that if we're in a natural space, right? And in Japan, they use this term Shinrin Yoku. And what they do is they have these little trails that are about a 15-minute walk, 20-minute walk, and they're actually treatment trails. You enter one end and you leave the other end, and that's it. There's nothing you don't need to do anything. You just kind of walk through that area. And what they found is that people just being in that natural environment, it's life, your life meeting life that's in these forests. There is a level of communication we have yet to understand. There are ions in the air, there are aromatic compounds in the air that you breathe in that it's just subconscious. You're not even aware of it. But things start changing in your body just by being in this space and experiencing those ions, those compounds, and everything like that. And there's all this research that came out of this concept of forest walking, where they would do blood samples before and after people came out of that trail. And after that 15-20 minute walk, people's blood chemistry would change, their blood pressure would change, their other health biomarkers would, would positively change, and it's phenomenal. Okay, so even if you have shoes on, if you can find an area where, there is a lot of nature there, just be in that space. It will happen automatically.
Yeah, that's great tips. Thank you. I feel like this conversation would not be complete if we didn't talk about some of the energy mechanics because that goes into that next level, that expansion. Where do you see the biggest payoff for really reclaiming cellular vitality? Would it be mitochondria, circadian light, mineral rebalance, hot, cold breath? I mean, you've already talked about breath work, but I would love to know if someone is overwhelmed, what is the smartest first lever to really push down or to venture into?
Sure, sure. So mitochondrial health, when we talk about that, the mitochondria produce the component, the energy component, the ATP component that we talk about, that drives everything. Okay. That's the currency that's common to everything in our body. Okay. Everything meaning everything. The thoughts you think, your skin health, your mental health, and your neurotransmitters that are being formed, your hormones that are being produced, all of that uses ATP energy, right? So when we say mitochondrial health, it's not a specific area, it's really describing your overall health, okay? So when we talk about improving mitochondrial health, all these things that we've talked about improve mitochondrial health, okay? And uh, all the way from that morning sunlight exposure to that movement. And I would say, to answer your question, apart from those things that we have talked about, which will surely improve your mitochondrial health and energy, the piece that perhaps we haven't touched upon is the aspect of connecting with food. And that's really chapter 3 in my book. It's like paradigm 3 that I talked about. And we talked about connecting with the earth, connecting with our body. And the third paradigm is connecting with food. And food becomes so important. And when I talk about food, it's a bit counterintuitive. And what I mean by that is when I do a stage talk, I'll usually say that when you eat something, you know, how is your body receiving that food? Is your body going, yay, here is food coming in, or is your body, how do you think your body is reacting? And people will give me all these separate answers, and whatnot. And I would say, and then I tell them that when you put anything in your mouth, your body actually, in the initial phase, is very cautious because it's trying to analyze what just came in, okay? Because digestion is one of the most energy intensive process in your body, okay? And so first your body's trying to figure out, is this anything foreign that I need to react to? Or is this close to earth and is something that will be beneficial to me, right? So depending on what we put into our body, we can put it in a alert and inflamed mode, or it could be in a form of a mode where it says, oh, this is something I can assimilate and use as energy. Okay. And so making that decision, that what is going in your body, and is it going to bring you life or take life away? It's huge. Okay. And it's when people understand that what the food is actually doing to you, it really changes how people view food. Okay. And nowadays, most of us eat more for our palate rather than for our vitality, right? And nothing wrong with eating foods that you like, and I'm all for having, there's certain restaurant dishes, there's certain places that we go to, and they're awesome. But again, that cannot be the norm because I do want to feed my vitality, you know. And I think that has been when people understand that aspect that we want to feed our vitality, and that's where the true energy is coming from, the mitochondria, that we want to optimize food so that we can produce that what we call is that primal energy, you know. And one aspect to this, okay, and this is something that comes from the Hadza, okay. Um, what was interesting when I was doing this research and I was looking up like all the research on the studied this Hadza tribe and my own experiences, people think that, oh, these Hadza tribe, they must eat a lot of meat and because they're hunting down these animals and that they're cooking them and they're eating these, and it's not true. Actually, a lot of their diet is from foraging and eating berries and tubers. Actually, a good amount of diet is comes from tubers, and I know that because I still love the tubers that I ate there. Particularly, there's a tuber called a particular type of yucca that comes from there. I can taste it. I can close my eyes. I can taste it right now. I loved it, and what's interesting is that when you eat these tubers, they contain a insane amount of prebiotic fiber, okay? And that prebiotic fiber, when you eat these tubers, give you a comparison, the average American gets about 15 grams of protein. Okay, if you get 15 grams of protein, you're doing good. That's good. Okay,
What? 15 grams. Holy moly. Okay.
okay. But that's good. That's like if you're getting 15, that's good. Okay. I'm saying most people are getting less than that, right? When you compare to the Hadza tribes, they're getting like 150, okay, because of all the tubers and everything they eat. And what happened is when they tried to figure out why these guys had this unstoppable energy and this such a low incidence of chronic disease, and they traced it back that their food intake with all these tubers and this fiber gave them so much prebiotic fiber that their gut microbiome was just incredible. Like they had one of the most diverse gut microbiome. And because of that superb gut microbiome diversity, their body was able to just handle all these stressors and would not doesn't develop all these chronic diseases that we have. So
Wow.
it's such a fascinating connection when you think about it, that it's actually in foods that feed the microbiome. That's where the true vitality and health and energy is coming from. Yeah.
And that makes complete sense. I mean, that is a whole other topic, a huge topic of the gut microbiome and how that really impacts. But all of that makes so much sense because that is our foundation. It is where most of our immune health cells reside. And if you don't have that strong gut microbiome that's diverse, then stressors can really impact you at a deeper level. So, which then cascades into inflammation and all that stuff, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
if you just look at the just two quick scientific pearls, one, we have more microbial cells than human cells in our body. Okay. We are more microbes than human, actually. So when you eat, you're actually feeding them more than you, first of all. And the second piece is it's almost 90% of serotonin and some of the neurotransmitters are produced in your gut. So you think that all these neurotransmitters are produced here, but they're actually produced here, you know? And so when people say, "Oh, I don't feel that energetic. I don't feel like myself anymore," it's actually coming from here, which is it's just phenomenal if you think about that. So
Yeah. Wow. Wild. That's so wild. Well, Kavin, let's talk about your book. Tell us about your book and how people have started to shift just by reading it and implementing some of these paradigms.
sure. One of the comments I get, and if you go to Amazon and if you read some of the reviews, you'll see what people are saying, and I think one of the aspects which I didn't think about when I wrote it, I was just, for me, like I said, I come from a designer background, and my lineage, so I wanted to just design the book so that it was like made sense. So I said, okay, we're gonna write a chapter and we're gonna give real clear directions because like my whole family is all about like design and like they're like, no, it has to be perfect.
I love
You
it.
have to give like clear. So I said, okay, we're gonna give clear. So at the end of each chapter, I would say, okay, here are the 8 takeaways. This is what you want to do, and so the first thing people would say is, that's my favorite part. I could go to the end of the chapter and you can tell me what I need to do tomorrow. So I think people engage with that aspect the most. And I'm glad that at least that you read something you enjoy and then you have some takeaways which you can apply that day if you want. Okay. And so I've done that for every single chapter. And then I have a whole chapter on uh, Primal Reset program where I tie everything together in one chapter where people can read that and say, what are these changes I can make? And a lot of things we just talked about already. And there are many more tips and tricks in the book. And if people can engage with that through the book, and on my website, which is the same as the book title, primalhealthdesign.com. There are some downloads that people can get. And if have people want a deeper dive where they want a one-on-one conversation with me and want more of like a 21-day transformative journey where you and I talk and really dive deep, then there's a way to get information about the Primal Reset program there as well.
Mm, I love that. Huh. I love a good organized checklist. That always makes me so happy. Oh, all right. So I'm doing something new, Kavin. Before we really get into where you are hanging out, where people can buy your book, and all of those logistics, let's do a little rapid fire. Rapid fire questions just to get a little deeper into your brain. Remember, no thinking. This is just what comes up right away. All
All
right.
right,
Are you
Roger.
ready? Okay. All right. So, number one, I want you to finish this sentence. I got younger when I stopped.
Staying up late.
Which was one of the first things we talked about. I love that. I love that. All right. Number two, if longevity had a soundtrack, what song belongs on track number one and why?
Uh, that's an interesting one. I would say staying alive.
That is a great answer. I love that. Yes, yes. Beautiful. All right, and number three, if your younger self could audit your current routine, what would surprise him the most, but in a good way?
What would surprise my present self or my younger
Your
self?
younger self.
Ah, I would say my present routine is way better than my younger self. And I would say my eating habits would surprise my younger self the most. And I used to love all the sugary cereals. And I grew up in that era where Captain Crunch and Cinnamon Toast Crunch and yeah, Fruit Loops and you're a young kid watching televisions and cartoons and all these cereal ads are coming. You're like, Mom, I want that. And you just never thought anything of it. And I look back and I go, oh my God, that what were we putting in our bodies in terms of the artificial colors and all that first thing in the morning instead of really feeding our body what would improve the mitochondrial health and everything that we talk about. So that I can for sure has drastically changed. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hey, listen, who cares about all the dyes when you can get a really cool toy?
Yeah, exactly.
And
It
seriously,
was worth it. It was totally
it
worth
was
it.
totally worth it. Oh,
The colored milk is like fantastic. You get to
yeah.
drink the colored milk.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's awesome. Love it. Love it. All right. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I would love to know how people can find you. Where are you hanging out? What are you excited about in your work? And of course, where can people buy your book?
Sure. Book is on Amazon and every other platform. It's available worldwide, actually, in all countries. So, book is titled Primal Health Design. It's the website is also same, primalhealthdesign.com. And that website actually will bring you to a splash page where people can connect with me via newsletter. I'm on LinkedIn, and which is a great platform to connect with me. It's Kavin Mistry, MD. And you can find me on LinkedIn, which is a great platform. A lot of people throw questions at me on LinkedIn, and I always get a notification. I answer. But same, Kavin Mistry, MD. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and any one of those platforms that people want to use. LinkedIn is nice because I have a newsletter on there. It's called The Aligned Life, which I put out bi-weekly, and I cover important topics. And the topic this week, which I put out earlier this week, um, it's called the Seventh Horcrux, which is a segue from Harry Potter. If anybody remembers Harry Potter, and the Seventh Horcrux was that Harry was the seventh one, and he realized that in order to defeat the enemy, if people are not familiar with Harry Potter, in order to defeat the enemy, he had to sacrifice himself. And so I talk about that, how ultimately letting go of who we are lends to a larger life.
Mm.
And so that's what the Aligned Life newsletter and the blog is about. Yeah.
And all those links, of course, will be down in the show notes, like always. And you know what's funny you say about the Harry Potter, that beautiful picture that your wife did in the background. When we first signed on, I was like, that looks like the moving staircases in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It's kind of
I'll
funny.
I'll tell her that. I'll tell her that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, this has been awesome. Do you have any last words that you want to lay on the hearts of the listeners before we sign off for today?
Tansy, it's been a pleasure. I would tell the listeners that, listen, one of the things that we've been programmed to believe is that we are set to age and decline at a certain point in our life. All the science and everything is pointing to the fact that there is no set decline, that a lot of the aging process is in our hands. And if we can be proactive about it, if we can design routines that bring back these primal connections, that we can really reclaim our health and reverse our biological age. Hence, the title Primal Health Design is my aim and my mission is really to give people those connections back so that, together we can really have a culture where we are not dependent on traditional medicine. I come from the medical world, so I can speak to you, but I don't want you showing up on my CT screen or my MRI screen, right? Because you don't belong there. You let your body age naturally and be beautiful and blossom into everything that we were created to be.
Mm. Thank you so much, Kaveen. I appreciate you.